Hello and welcome to Empire Sports Talk. I am your host, Roman Gennaro, and today is a great day to go 1-0. I'm going to keep it short and sweet today, as not a lot's going on in the NBA or NHL, no major trade news to report, but there are a couple of things around baseball and the NFL preseason that I'd like to talk about. First, though, I want to mention if you are as big a fan of sports documentaries as I am, I have two for you to check out. The first you may have heard about. I'm a little bit late to the party on this, but I'm really enjoying Quarterback on Netflix, which focuses in its first season on Patrick Mahomes, Kirk Cousins, and Marcus Mariota from last year's NFL season. And I am just so fascinated with that kind of hyper focus on the preparation, performance, and mental mindset of athletes as they go about their business. And I think that's what draws me to sports docs, and Quarterback is a great one. One of the things I loved on The Last Dance was that kind of player on players on players kind of interview thing, like you heard from Larry Bird and Charles Barkley and Reggie Miller about what they thought when they were going up against the Bulls and Michael Jordan, and that kind of hindsight, unbiased, unemotional look at what they were thinking at that time in their careers. There's not that doesn't exist in Quarterback because it just solely focuses on those three players. But I am fascinated by the sports doc. And the other one you may not have heard about because it used to be on Netflix before they shelved it for 3 years. Now the fourth season of QB1 is on Tubi, and as I said, it was shelved for 3 years, so it focuses on the high school senior seasons of now NFL quarterbacks Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, as well as Kentucky Wildcats quarterback Deuce Hogan. And it's interesting to go all the way back to their senior seasons. And as I said, now that two of those three are in the NFL, and kind of heard what they had to say about going to the NFL now that we know that they are. But even though it focused on these two guys that are now pro quarterbacks and one that's still in college, I found myself most drawn to Deuce Hogan, and his leadership on the field. I would love to get him on the podcast in the future to talk about the way that he leads a team as a quarterback. And that's what I found myself most drawn to. So if you are as big a fan of sports docs as I am, check out Quarterback on Netflix and the fourth season of QB1 on Tubi. You will not be disappointed. The first thing I want to talk about is something that gets me really fired up. If you follow us on Twitter, you've seen the amount of articles that I've retweeted, or sorry, Twitter or X. You've seen the amount of articles that I've reposted, the amount of things I've had to say about this situation. But about a week ago, Baltimore Orioles announcer Kevin Brown was suspended by the team after remarks he made on air about the team's previous poor performance at Tropicana Field when playing on the road against the Tampa Bay Rays. The team did not like his comments and suspended him indefinitely. The problem I have here is these were not comments that Kevin made offhand. These were not comments that Kevin made of his own volition. These were comments that he read off a graphic that was displayed on screen that was meant to point out how improved the Baltimore Orioles are this year over years past. As he was pointing out that if the Orioles had won that game that day, which they did, they would have equaled their win total at Tropicana Field from the previous 3 years. And the Orioles front office saw that as slight. They saw it as making the team look cheap. But again, my problem is that production meetings are held and by several departments before a game goes to air. As somebody who's been in production meetings before at many different levels, everything that you see and hear on a telecast for the most part is thought out and agreed on ahead of time, and that includes the graphics department. So that graphic that was put up about the Orioles' previous record was agreed on by someone who had final say of, yeah, let's make that graphic. That's a good graphic. And Kevin was just doing his job. Kevin, there was a graphic on screen. It was Kevin's job to read it, and he did. And again, it was to point out how much better the Orioles are this year as opposed to previous years. And it's not a secret. If you follow baseball, you'll know that before the Orioles caught fire in the second half of last season, they were not a good team. They barely missed the playoffs last year, but that was because again they were the best team. I believe they had the first or second best record in the entire league for the second half last season. And before that, everyone knew they weren't good. I think the season before last they lost 100 games, and so it wasn't a secret that the previous 3 years that they had poor records against several teams, not just the Rays, but considering that the Rays have been consistently good since 2020 when they made the World Series, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. So the fact that so Kevin Brown was doing his job by reading a graphic had to have been pre-approved by someone. And the organization, believing that that was somehow slanderous and not a statement of fact, was completely wrong. And for about a week, it has taken focus away from the great performance that the Orioles team is putting up on the field, and instead everyone's talking about Kevin Brown. Immediately after he was indefinitely suspended, Twitter slash X exploded, saying the Orioles should be ashamed, Kevin Brown should resign, because again, it wasn't a free speech issue. It was Kevin reading a graphic that his graphics team provided him. And so no one should have been suspended for that. And if by some unfathomable way you felt that somebody needed to be suspended, why not suspend the person that either made that graphic or the person that approved that graphic to be made? It's not the on-air person's fault that a graphic went up and he read it. That's what he's supposed to do. But again, that graphic was not slanderous. It was a statement of fact. But of course, we live in a world today where cold hard facts are disregarded if it's not what someone else agrees with. So who knows? I have much more to say about this. I've taken a week already to kind of process some thoughts. I still have a lot more. I'm going to post a blog about it later in the week. But then I think the Orioles kind of knew they screwed up pretty quick. I think social media took care of that for them, and they immediately said that Kevin would be reinstated for this past Friday night's game against Seattle. And the immediate reaction, several on-air announcers came to Kevin Brown's defense, including the White Sox announcer and the Mets announcer took time out of the Mets broadcast to say they put the camera on him in the booth and to go on a full diatribe about Kevin Brown and said he's one of the best people in this game. He's one of the most passionate. And if the Orioles don't want him, there are 29 other teams who do. And the White Sox announcer during a telecast for his team made a comment about the White Sox record against the Orioles and then went on to say off the cuff, "I hope I don't get suspended for that." So announcers from around the league and baseball writers came to Kevin Brown's defense. Then it was announced that he would, as I said, return to the booth on Friday against the Mariners, to which social media said that Kevin Brown should get on air for the team and then resign on air live because he would have many offers waiting for him. Buster Olney made a point to say that he didn't so much say that Kevin Brown should resign on air, but he did say that Kevin Brown has a contract negotiation coming up and should negotiate a clause that prevents him from such kind of lame suspensions in the future, and that Kevin Brown holds all the cards right now. And I believe that was the consensus from around the league after that happened. And then Kevin Brown being the picture of class in this whole situation that he is, released a statement saying there's no one else I would rather broadcast for than Baltimore. I've talked to the GM, I've talked to the owner, it's been ironed out, blah, 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 blah. And then I watched the opening of that Friday night telecast, and he was as classy as could be. No saltiness in his voice, no hint that anything had happened. But I think, Kevin Brown said the right thing. He's a better man than I would be in that situation. I'll tell you that right now, to even put out a statement saying that, man, I love announcing for this organization. But I think I would be surprised if he remained with them after this year. He's still employed by them. He wanted to get back in the booth, so he said what you would say in that situation. But I think it's clear that the Orioles' mishandling of the situation, it's time for that Kevin Brown could find a better situation anywhere else. And as it was said many times on social media, it's a shame that this happened because the Orioles are having a great season on the field, and this completely overshadowed what they're doing. And it's a really special story what they're doing, being the team with the best record in the American League, and this just overshadowed it for a week. And it's a shame, and I think Kevin Brown deserves better. The Orioles should be ashamed of themselves. I will have more on this at a later date. The next thing I want to talk about, we're going to stay in baseball for a minute, is I mentioned the White Sox a little bit ago. Technically, I mentioned their announcer. Now I want to talk about the team. The team is having a rough time. And I'm not just talking about on the field, although it makes sense when you hear what several stories have come out about the Chicago White Sox in the past few days about how bad that culture is. And look, the team is 47 and 72. They're in fourth place in the Central, only ahead of the Kansas City Royals, who in my opinion are playing a lot better than the White Sox, despite a worse record. I think that's because they got off to a rough start. But the Royals are playing a lot better right now than the White Sox. And this is a White Sox team that just 2 years ago was, talked about as maybe the World Series favorite in the American League, and now they're 47 and 72, and then all these reports coming out. So obviously, the thing that everybody knows is that after a slide into second base from Cleveland Guardians All-Star Jose Ramirez. He believed that Tim Anderson kind of was a little too rough with his tag, and they got into an on-field scuffle, and Jose Ramirez kind of knocked Tim Anderson to the ground, and Tim Anderson was not in the lineup the next day. Jose Ramirez was, and that kind of was the rock that started the whole mess rolling down the hill. And it was one of these things where we started hearing stuff about the White Sox as a whole after this, and Jose Ramirez, when commenting on the incident, said that he didn't believe Tim Anderson played the game the right way, and he didn't respect what he did, and all this sort of stuff. So it wasn't good, and it just got worse from there. During the trade deadline, reliever Kenyon Middleton was traded to the Yankees, and upon his trade, well, first of all, the White Sox traded several players, and I have things to say about some of the players that they traded, and it kind of leads more to the problem. Um, Kenyon Middleton was traded to the Yankees, upon which he said he was excited to be part of that culture. He was excited to be a part of that um, organization, and when they asked him kind of what he meant by that, he stated that he felt that this was his only year in Chicago, and he felt that there was no discipline among the team, there was no structure, that that if players missed meetings, there was no repercussions. It was just like, okay, you missed a meeting, whatever. If players were late to practice, it was kind of whatever. It was this laissez-faire attitude around the entire organization from top to bottom. And I think I heard something this week the whole mess could have started a few years ago when the owner of the White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf, most known for building that right there, the Bulls dynasty. He also owns the White Sox. That when he hired his friend Tony La Russa to manage the team, a couple of years ago that that was seen as kind of the wrong move, and it started kind of this mess of culture. But they moved on from Tony La Russa, and so it's kind of hard to put all the blame there. But but Kenyon Middleton was talking about like there was no discipline. If you didn't show up for workouts, it was whatever. This whole thing. And veteran pitcher Lance Lynn, who had also been traded to the Dodgers around that same time at the deadline, who had played several years in Chicago, backed Middleton up and said, "Look, I was there a lot longer than him, and he's not wrong. Like there was no structure, there was no like authoritative system. There was no discipline. Well, so it's an all-star pitcher, a veteran pitcher backing up this younger player, saying he's not wrong about this. And current White Sox player Andrew Benintendi kind of refuted the statements by both Lynn and Middleton. But what's Benintendi going to say? He's a current player. What's he going to say? Oh yeah, it sucks here. He's a current player. He's on the payroll. He's getting paid by Chicago. Of course, he's going to back up the team. I'd be interested to hear what he had to say, what he has to say once he leaves. Whenever Benintendi goes to his next organization, that would be one of the first questions I'd ask him. You made comments when you were with Chicago. Do you walk those back at all? Because there's been a ton of evidence that what Middleton is saying is true, and Lance Lynn himself, as I said, backed him up. There was a report on Twitter. Kenyon Middleton's mother said that his kids were kicked out of White Sox daycare because I guess, and maybe this was after the trade, so it may not be a thing because I'm sure that's for players and staff and their children only. But the kids wanted to go back and play with the friends that they'd made, and I guess his mother took them there, and they were asked to leave. I'm sure that's security just doing their job, but with everything else going on, and that's not it. There is a Jake Berger who was also one of the players traded. He was traded to Miami, came out and said, and didn't specifically knock Chicago, but how can you take it any other way at this point? He said he was traded to the Marlins, and he said he's never had more fun playing baseball. Now the culture in Miami is right now is it's going pretty good in Miami, but it's hard to take that any other way than a knock on his previous organization. And then those three comments have been confirmed. They were made by players. And then there was another report, and this is just a report, that shortly before the All-Star game, Yasmani Grandal was left off the lineup card and said that, and was not happy, and said that he was going to leave early, that he was going to leave the team for the All-Star break, and was very unhappy at being left out of the lineup that day. And apparently in the locker room or in the trainer's room, Tim Anderson was in one of the tubs, either the cooling tub or the hot tub, and heard Grendel say this and said, "Fine, if you're going to act like that, get out of here." To which Grendel reportedly walked over to Tim Anderson and slapped him in the face. Now this story's not been confirmed, but I have a hard time not believing it given everything else. Now Grendel was later later came in as a pinch hitter in that game, so he did not follow through with his threat to leave. But and I agree with what Tim Anderson said in that moment, if in fact he said it, where it's like, if you don't want to be here, if you don't want to be a team player, get out. But considering that Tim Anderson's name has come up in these reports on the other side as well, it is what it is. I think it's hard not to believe every story that comes out of Chicago right now about the White Sox with the struggles they're having in a not great division. So it was up for grabs, but Chicago never played well. And again, this is 2 years removed from having a really really good team, and a lot of those players were still there. Giolito was just traded, and Ronaldo Lopez was just traded, but those guys were there a couple of years ago. So a lot of that team is still intact. And that just a couple of years ago was an AL favorite. So I can imagine there's a lot of frustration. And then you look across town and you see the Cubs playing a lot better. and you're failing in a division that isn't playing very well. The division leading Twins are just a couple of games above 500. So I imagine this is a situation where all this frustration is boiling over, but this just doesn't look good for the White Sox organization top to bottom. So I just it's a mess on the South Side right now. The last thing I want to talk about, the big kind of attention grabbing thing in sports right now is the fact that the NFL preseason is underway, and with that we get a look at a lot of the rookies that are out there getting their first professional action. I want to kind of look at the top four quarterbacks that were drafted, and as all four of them were expected to go in the top 10. Three of them did, with Will Levis falling just inside the second round. I want to take a look at all four of them and how they fared in their first game. Keep in mind, this is just one game, it's a preseason game, so it's hard to put too much stock in it. It's first professional action for a lot of these guys, so you know they're going to be nervous. There's going to be they're going to be tense. So it's hard to put too much stock in it, but I want to break it down anyway. We're gonna start with the number one overall pick, Bryce Young. He had very limited action, and I think the biggest takeaway from his day, as he threw just 6 passes for 21 yards, and I think the biggest takeaway for his day was how bad the Carolina offensive line is, and I think that's one of the reasons why I a lot of people are picking Carolina to be a sleeper wild card pick, and I don't see that this year. Because the offensive line is going to need to protect Bryce Young. He's already undersized. He's unexperienced in this league, and so he's gonna need those big guys up front to hold him up. And they did not do a great job. He took a couple of big hits early against the Jets and completed just 4 of 6 passes, and it was a very short day. But again, the big takeaway was that the offensive line needs to be better. So the big takeaway for wild card hopeful Carolina, a lot of people have them winning that division over. I personally have the Saints with the new look Derek Carr, and if you haven't seen Derek Carr in camp, he is new look Derek Carr. I have the Saints, but some people have the Carolina Panthers. And a couple of years from now, I think that's a good pick when Bryce Young has some more weapons and they have some more time to build. But right now, I don't think so. And this first preseason game showed me why that offensive line is not ready. He didn't take too many shots down the field. He kind of kept everything in front of him. Bryce's throws were pretty conservative, but I wouldn't panic about him because, as I said, the main takeaway is that the offensive line needs work, not on Bryce himself. I think Bryce will be fine. I think Bryce has the highest ceiling of these four. I think he's really smart. He's really composed. He doesn't get too animated on the field, which for a rookie, like that's a good thing. He doesn't let his emotions get the best of him. He's a smart guy. I think the Panthers have the right guy. I think he was clearly the best guy in this draft, but when you have a guy like that, like think back to when Burrow was drafted and he got injured and tore up his knee in his first couple of games. All anybody said was that offensive line really needs to be better, and so they immediately went and got better. So it's kind of the same thing with Bryce Young. The offensive line's got to be better. Let's see how they address it. Next, let's shift to Anthony Richardson, who of the four I was the most impressed by. I think Anthony Richardson is set up to have the best rookie season because, as I said, I don't think the Panthers are ready yet. Anthony Richardson made some really good throws. He did have one bad pick on the opening drive, but what I took away from that pick is that yes, it was a throw that probably shouldn't have been made along the sideline, but it was a quick sidearm throw, similar to the kind that we see from Patrick Mahomes. So he was trying to get the ball out quick as to not get into too much trouble, and he was trying to find a way to get it to his receiver. So I think with some fine tuning, decision making like that could turn into a weapon, much like we see from Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying Anthony Richardson is going to be Patrick Mahomes. Don't misquote me there. But I think I look at that one pick and think getting it out quickly at a different arm angle is the kind of thing that Patrick Mahomes does. and it works well for him. So with a little bit more coaching, I think that could be a weapon for Anthony Richardson. Um, he used his legs well. He stayed out of trouble in the backfield. Had a couple of rushing attempts. He didn't have a touchdown in the game, but he did have a 40-yard seam down the sideline that was dropped by Alec Pierce. There was good coverage from the DB, and Alec Pierce was able to only go up with one hand and actually had it in his hand for a while. And then just as he went to the ground, he wasn't able to hang on. And normally from Alec Pierce, he's a guy that I'm really high on. I've said on multiple occasions that I think him and Michael Pittman are one of the most underrated wide receiver duos in the NFL. I've said about Pierce, I've said he makes the hard catches look easy and the impossible ones look catchable. So I'm not too worried about that because I think with a little bit more time together, Alec Pierce is going to catch those. I do think the coverage from the Bills corner was really, really good, only allowing Pierce to get one hand in the air. But Anthony Richardson did have a 40-yard ball that would have been a touchdown dropped, and he put it on the money in the back of the end zone. So his final line was 7 of 12 for 67 yards and an interception, but he did have that 40-yard ball dropped. And the most important thing to me, because this is what you have to look at when you're talking about rookies in the NFL. The most important thing to me is that I noticed that there were several starters on Buffalo's defense in the game early, and I didn't feel like Anthony Richardson looked intimidated. In fact, I felt that he looked confident against several of the Bills' starters. And if you're a Colts team coming off a bad season at the quarterback position with admittedly a good roster top to bottom behind Richardson, a lot of people forget that because last season was so bad. With admittedly a good roster behind Anthony Richardson and the likelihood that Jonathan Taylor will play despite the issues with Jim Irsay and the contract situation, I think this Colts team has a lot of upside, and I'm not too concerned with what I saw from Anthony Richardson. I think his arm action and motion on that pick could be turned into a plus with a little bit more seasoning. So I'm not too worried about that. He did get the start in that game. So as of right now, he's ahead of Gardner Minshew on the depth chart. And I think as of right now is expected to start week one. But Minshew did go 6 for 6 with 72 yards. So he had a good day in the opener as well. So we'll keep an eye on that quarterback battle. If the Colts feel that Anthony Richardson isn't quite ready, Gardner Minshew will be the guy. I think either way the Colts go in week one, they are facing the Jags right away. Either quarterback could bring a lot of energy that was missing from that position a year ago. I do think it's important for the organization that Anthony Richardson be that guy week one and just kind of let him learn. I felt like he looked very, very good in his first preseason game against a team as good as the Buffalo Bills. Next, I want to go to Will Levis in Tennessee. An up and down performance for me. He made some good throws. He played much of the game. I think he rotated with Malik Willis. And look, Will Levis and Malik Willis are battling for the QB2 spot. This is not a starting quarterback battle. The starting quarterback going into the season is Ryan Tannehill. So these guys are battling for who's going to be behind him. And the biggest takeaway for Will Levis, he made some good decisions in the middle of the game, but at the end of the game, he faced a little bit of pressure rolling out of the pocket, and he missed a wide open receiver coming across the middle of the field at the end of the game. I believe there was like 19 seconds left, and he missed the receiver going across the middle of the field, close to the end zone. Wide open guy, missed him. And then the very next play, he threw the ball into traffic, nowhere near his intended target, and it was picked off. So that interception was really bad, especially coming one play after missing a wide open receiver. It was against the Bears, who are expected to be a little better than a year ago, but that's mostly on Justin Fields' improvement. I think there are too many holes in that roster still for them to make a massive improvement record wise. But they were playing the Bears. It was the preseason, I get it. They were playing the Bears and they did lose and they did get shut out they did get shut out in the second half against Chicago, where Malik Willis and Will Levis played basically the entire game um, between the two of them. And I do think Malik Willis fared better. He was 16 for 25 with 189 yards, one interception, and a rush TD. So I believe, as it stands now, that Will Levis will be QB3 on that roster. But what does it say about the team's confidence in Malik Willis that they took Will Levis early in the second when just a year ago they had taken Willis to be the quarterback of the future in Tennessee? So who knows what the situation there is in Tennessee, how much longer they'll stick with Ryan Tannehill as the starter, how much longer he'll want to play. So it'd be good to keep an eye on both Levis and Willis moving forward to see who cements kind of that because the quarterback, the QB2 will kind of be looked at as the quarterback of the future. So it'll be interesting to kind of keep an eye on that as well. And then last but not least, we'll take a look at the guy who went into action first, and that's CJ Stroud. Look, he only played two series. He was 2 for 4. He did throw a pick on a guy. They're playing the Patriots, and he probably should have seen the defender there. But he didn't, and he but there was a lot of zip on that ball. The offensive line's not good. He did take a sack. And again, when I post my predictions for the NFL season this week, I did talk about that. I think that the situation that the foundation is being built for something really cool in Houston. I think D'Amico Ryans is the right coach. I think CJ Stroud is a great quarterback of the future, and I think they have a really nice young wide receiver in Tank Dell who caught a nice touchdown in that preseason opener. But after two series, Stroud did give way to incumbent starter Davis Mills, who looked a little bit better, in my opinion, but it's just week one. They're probably much like Bryce Young. They're probably giving easing Stroud into NFL action, which I think is a pretty good call. So I'm not too worried about that either. It is week one. I think Houston's building something really cool, but they are far away from that being realized. They still have a lot of holes on that team that they need to be addressed. But I think D'Amico Ryan's a coach, C.J. Stroud and Tank Dell as those battery mates on the offense, and then Will Anderson Jr. on defense is a great start. But I don't see this team winning more than one or two games in the regular season and being back at the top of the draft boards next year, which isn't a bad thing because I think they have several draft picks in the next couple of years. So all in all, I think these four quarterbacks had about as good openers as you could ask. It's the preseason. This is their first look at the NFL, and the NFL is entirely different. They talk about whether it be basketball or well, whether it be the NBA or the NFL, every player has their welcome to the league moment because it doesn't matter how good competition you faced in college. It doesn't matter what conference you played in. Getting to the NFL or the NBA is a different story. So I think it's good for these guys. I think ultimately it's good for each of these four to have faced adversity in their first game, with C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young being hit hard, with Anthony Richardson and Will Levis throwing those interceptions, to face adversity right away because that they're not used to that. Look, after watching QB1 and seeing Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, they were the top guys in high school. They were the guys who could do no wrong. At East Side High School in Gainesville, Florida, one of Richardson's coaches was talking about we should retire his number two because he's the best player to have ever played at this high school. And Bryce Young was the top high school quarterback of the year in 2020, and then he goes to Alabama and he wins the Heisman Trophy and he wins the national championship. And Anthony Richardson goes to Florida and finds some success there, and he's the top five pick, and Bryce Young is a top pick, and that's great. But you come into the league full of grown men. You watch QB1 and you see Anthony Richardson, who's grown man size at 18, and he gets hurt and he leaves the game, and his backup quarterback comes in. He's a freshman and he looks terrified, and he looks like an 11-year-old boy. It's like so high school and college. you could still stand out as a man among boys depending on the situation. But in the NFL, it's all men. Like, there's a reason why they have those welcome to the league moments. So I think it was good for those quarterbacks to face that adversity. And I look forward to seeing all three of these guys, or all four of these guys, kind of take the next step. I expect three of the four of them to be the starter, if not right away, pretty quickly. I expect Stroud and Young to take the reins right away. Anthony Richardson, I'm confident he'll be the week one starter, but it depends on what we see in the next two preseason games. And then Will Levis, he's not auditioning to be the starter. He's auditioning to be the QB two. So we'll have to wait a bit to see what Levis does, but I look forward to seeing these rookies grow more. That's what training camp is, even for veterans. It's about growth. It's about improvement. It's about taking that next step. So every day is, as we say on this show, every day is a good day to go 1-0. Just show up to practice, show up to camp, and go 1-0 that day. And just improve. And that's all these rookies can do because it's literally their first pro game. Let's not overstate the fact that we can't overreact to anything we saw. It's their first pro action. And for many of them, not against starters. Anthony Richardson might have faced some Bills defensive starters, but it wasn't for a whole game. It wasn't for very long. So it's going to be a different story week one. And I look forward to seeing what happens. That's all I have for you this week. This has been Empire Sports Talk, my mom's favorite podcast. I am your host, Roman Gennaro. Please subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Stay tuned for a lot of new content coming out this week and weeks in the future, including some really cool content involving the Xbox and some really cool simulations. So head on over to Empire Sports Talk on YouTube, X, Instagram, any of the social media platforms. We're there, and I promise you'll like what you see in the coming days. Again, this is Roman Gennaro for Empire Sports Talk. I'll see you next time.